In the heart of the desert, where the sun struck the stone like a living flame, Persepolis rose from the earth as if the gods themselves had carved it. The air was heavy with incense and myrrh, the scent of eternity clinging to the marble corridors. Columns soared like frozen rays of sunlight, and beneath them, thousands of courtiers bowed their heads to a single man seated upon a throne of gold. His name was Xerxes, son of Darius the Great and Atossa, grandson of Cyrus, who forged an empire out of dust and divine will. To his people, he was not just a ruler, but the breath of Ahura Mazda on earth. His bloodline was believed to carry the command of heaven, his word the border between order and chaos. From his palace on the terrace of Persepolis, he looked upon a world that stretched farther than any horizon. Armies obeyed his gesture, cities trembled at the echo of his name, and even the sea was whipped when it defied him. Yet power that vast is a weight that no mortal can bear without cracking. In the glow of torches and the hush of ritual, Xerxes began to fear the very things he had conquered. He saw betrayal in every whisper, impurity in every touch, and shadows gathering behind the beauty of his own blood. The empire glittered, but its gold concealed decay. The walls shone like dawn, yet the silence behind them was darker than night. Within the heart of that radiance, something unseen began to rot. A fear so deep it reached even the royal heart that once burned with the fire of conquest. In the empire of gold, even love had to obey the law of fear. If you believe that history's brightest empires hide their darkest truths, follow and subscribe to our channel, where every whisper of power returns to speak again. Beyond the marble courtyards of Persepolis, where the sunlight died behind veils of silk, lay the hidden world that ruled the throne as much as any army. The royal harem was not a sanctuary of pleasure, but a chamber of politics wrapped in perfume. Every whisper that passed through its corridors could alter the fate of a province. Every glance between women was a calculation. Power here was not shouted, but woven like a thread through silence and ritual. At the center of this quiet storm was Amestris, the queen. Her beauty had long faded beneath the weight of duty, yet her presence filled every room. She prayed with the devotion of a priestess and punished with the precision of a soldier. To those who served her, she was both mercy and judgment. Her faith in the gods was absolute, but her faith in men had died long ago. She saw betrayal as inevitable, even holy, as if cruelty itself had become a form of worship. Beneath her crown lived a woman who had learned that compassion was weakness, and that to survive beside a god, one must become divine in cruelty. In another wing of the palace, the young Artaynte walked the same polished floors, unaware that her innocence was already marked. She was the daughter of Amestris, the king's own brother, and her laughter carried a purity rare in that golden labyrinth. But youth in such a place was a dangerous light. The walls had eyes, and the gaze of a king could turn affection into doom. Artaynte would soon learn that in the empire of Xerxes, the heart was not a sanctuary, but a weapon. And then there was the nameless princess, a daughter of Xerxes himself, known only in whispers. She moved like a ghost through the corridors, her face veiled even from the sun. No records speak of her, yet her absence lingers in the air of Persepolis. She embodied the silence of all women whose lives were erased to protect the illusion of royal perfection. The harem pulsed like a living organism, sustained by secrets and fear. Eunuchs guarded its gates, musicians softened its despair, and beyond every curtain lay another story never told. To outsiders, it was paradise. To those within, It was a cage lined with jewels. Each woman lived by instinct, measuring every word, every breath, every smile, because even a glance could cost a life. Within those walls, loyalty was just another name for survival. It began with a gift that should never have been given. Herodotus wrote of a day when Xerxes looked upon Artaynte, the daughter of his brother Macystes, and saw in her a reflection of all he once desired, yet could no longer possess. Her laughter reminded him of youth, her gentleness of a world uncorrupted by power. For a moment, the King of Kings forgot that affection in his court was treason against his own blood. Desire in a palace such as his was not a whisper of the heart, but an act of domination. When Artaynte appeared before him wearing an embroidered gown, the threads shimmering like captured sunlight, Xerxes felt something awaken within him. The robe had been woven by Amestris herself, every stitch a prayer, every color a vow of devotion. To take that garment from his queen and place it upon another woman was to unmake the sanctity of marriage, to turn love into a public wound. Yet he did it with the calm of one accustomed to divine right, believing that nothing sacred could be denied to a man chosen by heaven. Artaynte accepted the robe with trembling hands. To her it was not power, but danger. Yet the gaze of the king was impossible to escape. She did not yet understand that the gift was not a token of love, but a sentence pronounced in silk. In the empire of Xerxes, every favor carried the weight of an unspoken curse. As the days passed, rumors spread like smoke through the halls. Servants lowered their eyes. The queen's attendants whispered behind locked doors. The robe, once a symbol of purity, had become the banner of betrayal. Xerxes stood at the center of it all, serene, untouchable, lost in his conviction that everything within his sight existed only to serve him. Even his heart no longer belonged to himself. He believed that the royal blood within him was too holy to be ruled by human restraint. That desire was simply another form of command. The forbidden gift was more than cloth and color. It was a spark in a chamber filled with incense and jealousy, a beginning that could only end in ruin. In his attempt to claim beauty, Xerxes condemned himself to fear. He ruled men with fear and women with silence. The king's birthday began with the sound of drums rolling through the marble courts of Persepolis. The city glittered in celebration. Its streets hung with silks, its courtiers perfumed and smiling. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying trays of golden fruit and cups of wine. In every hall, the name of Xerxes was praised as divine. Yet behind the curtains of the inner palace, another kind of ritual was being prepared. While the empire rejoiced, the queen planned her own ceremony, one that would stain the day forever. Amestris sat in silence before the mirror of bronze as the sun rose. The reflection that stared back at her and no longer looked human, but carved from something colder. The robe she had woven with her own hands had been taken from her and placed on the shoulders of Artaynte, the young daughter of Macystes, her husband's own niece. In that act, the sanctity of her union had been broken. The betrayal burned not only as infidelity, but as humiliation before the gods. Yet Amestris knew she could not confront the king. To question Xerxes was to challenge heaven itself. So her anger turned toward the woman she believed had allowed the scandal to grow, the wife of Macystes, mother of Artaynte. When the day of celebration arrived, Amestris moved through the halls like a shadow of calm. Her face was serene, her gestures graceful, her voice low and measured. No one could read the storm behind her eyes. As Xerxes sat upon his throne receiving gifts from the noblemen, The queen's guards moved quietly through the corridors, seizing the wife of Amestris from her chamber. While music filled the banquet hall, the woman was dragged to a hidden court deep within the palace. Herodotus would later write that Amestris performed what she called an offering, a purification to please the gods and restore the balance her husband had defiled. The woman was mutilated piece by piece, each wound named as an offering, each cry swallowed by the roar of celebration outside. It was not a killing done in passion, but in devotion, an act the queen believed holy. She prayed as she worked, her lips moving in rhythm with the drums that echoed from the feast above. When the rite was finished, Amestris rose, her hands trembling, her gown spattered with the marks of faith. The torches burned low, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any curse. That night, Xerxes returned to his feast unaware that the music of his empire had been accompanied by screams. The courtiers toasted his glory, while the queen washed her hands in water that refused to run clear. In that single day, the empire revealed itself. Power had turned devotion into cruelty, faith into punishment, and love into a weapon. Amestris did not act from jealousy alone. She became the mirror of the throne, a reflection of the empire's own sickness. When gods are silent, mortals invent their own sacrifices. After the queen's act of vengeance, the palace no longer breathed as it once had. Music ceased to echo through the corridors, and the fragrance of incense could no longer mask the scent of fear. The death of Amestris' wife had closed one wound only to open another, a wound no one dared to name, for within the same moon, the young Artaynte was gone. No decree was issued, no mourning allowed. Her chamber was emptied before dawn, her servants dismissed, her name erased from the rolls of the royal household. The king spoke of her no more. Those who served in the harem were told that the princess had been sent away to a distant temple for prayer and reflection. Yet everyone knew that such temples never returned what was sent to them. Some said Amestris demanded the girl's exile to cleanse the court of its shame. Others believed Xerxes himself ordered her disappearance to silence the last witness of his sin. Between them lay the unspoken truth that both needed her gone, for her existence had become unbearable to the empire's illusion of divine order. In the quiet nights that followed, whispers began to rise among the attendants, who still swept the halls outside her former room. They claimed that a song could be heard through the stone, faint and trembling, as if carried by a breath not of this world. It was the voice of a woman singing to the dead, a melody without words, rising and falling like a heartbeat remembered by the walls. The guards dismissed it as wind, but those who had known her wept in silence, certain that Artaynte's soul had never left. With time, the story grew into legend. She became the nameless daughter whose body vanished, but whose voice remained. Mothers told their daughters never to speak too softly, for silence was the one thing that could not be undone. In the songs of the servants, she was the spirit who wandered the corridors of Persepolis, carrying the grief of women who were punished for the sins of kings. When the empire finally fell and the palaces burned, travelers claimed to hear a faint echo carried by the desert wind. It was not the cry of the dying, but the same quiet song that once haunted the harem. Whether she lived or died, her silence outlasted the empire. The years that followed carried the echo of defeat. What began as a march of glory turned into a slow unraveling of the empire's certainty. Xerxes had crossed the Hellespont with a host so vast that the earth shook beneath it. He believed the world itself would kneel. Yet at Thermopylae, the arrogance of numbers met the defiance of a few. The mountain pass that was meant to open the way to Greece became a grave of pride. The victory that followed was hollow, for in its shadow a greater loss was waiting. At Salamis, the sea devoured his fleet, and the waves that once obeyed his whips now swallowed his dreams. When the smoke cleared, even the gods seemed to turn away. Back in Persepolis, the king's voice grew harder, his gaze colder. Each failure on the battlefield became a ghost that followed him into the palace. He could no longer trust generals, brothers, or priests. The marble halls where laughter once echoed turned into corridors of suspicion. Servants spoke in murmurs, ministers bowed lower, and the queen moved through the silence like a memory of a life that no longer existed. Xerxes ruled from behind curtains, seeing betrayal in every reflection. Night after night, he woke drenched in sweat. In his dreams, he saw his daughters kneeling before him, their robes soaked in blood, their faces veiled in mourning. They offered him crowns made of ash and whispered words he could not understand. When he reached for them, they vanished like smoke. He would rise from his bed trembling, the air thick with incense, the torches flickering as if the palace itself were breathing in fear. The god he once claimed to embody now felt distant, and in that emptiness his mind began to feed on itself. The empire outside mirrored the decay within its ruler. The satraps rebelled, the treasuries drained, and the roads that once carried armies now carried rumors. Xerxes clung to his throne as if it were the last proof of his divinity, unaware that it had already become his prison. The grandeur of Persepolis could no longer hide the truth. The fall of an empire does not begin with battle, but with the quiet corrosion of a heart that no longer knows compassion. One night, when the moon hung pale over the terrace, the king sat alone in the chamber where he had once received his victories. The walls were draped in red velvet, the same color that had seen his feasts and his sins. As he closed his eyes, footsteps approached from behind. The man who entered was not an enemy, but a servant, one of the few still allowed near him. A blade flashed, swift and almost gentle. Xerxes fell without a word, his blood darkening the silk at his feet. Thus ended the god-king, not by the sword of nations, but by the hand of a man who no longer feared him. The empire would live for a while longer, but its soul had already died the night its ruler forgot he was human. Centuries passed, and the empire that once stretched from the Indus to the Aegean faded into legend. The palaces of Xerxes turned to dust beneath the sun, their golden doors buried by time. Yet Persepolis endured, a skeleton of stone rising from the desert. When Alexander came with his armies, he found its terraces still gleaming in the moonlight, the scent of cedar still clinging to the walls. For a moment, even he hesitated, seeing not a fortress, but a memory of perfection carved by human hands. Then the torches were lit, and the flames rose into the sky like the judgment of forgotten gods. The fire devoured everything that had once called itself eternal. Gold melted into rivers, and columns cracked as the heat clawed at the heavens. Yet even as the roofs collapsed, the stone reliefs refused to fall. The figures of women carved into the walls stood motionless in the glare of destruction, their faces calm, their eyes unblinking. They watched the empire that had silenced them burn into ash. When dawn came, the smoke drifted across the valley, and the city lay broken. Yet those silent forms still held their place, untouched by time or mercy. Travelers who reached the ruins centuries later spoke of an uncanny stillness, as if the stones themselves were listening. They saw the traces of wings, the faint outline of robes, the delicate curves of faces that once belonged to queens, wives, daughters. No one could say whose hands had carved them, but every chisel mark seemed to carry a memory of pain. The wind that moved through the pillars whispered like the breath of ghosts. It was said that when the desert grew quiet enough, one could still hear the faint sound of a woman singing. History would call Xerxes great. His name would be written beside conquerors and kings. Yet the gods, if they still looked down, remembered something else. They remembered the cries hidden behind the marble, the sacrifices made in silence, the hearts that broke to keep the illusion of divinity alive. No empire falls by swords alone. It dies in the shadows of its own walls, in the silence that fear creates, in the hearts of those who can no longer speak the truth. If you believe that empires fall not by swords, but by secrets, subscribe to our channel, where every whisper of power finds its echo in history.